Fedor Holz started with a bankroll under $5,000 playing $40 tournaments, while living in a cramped room sharing space with other broke poker players who had the exact same dream he had of making it big in this game someday. His graph was going down. He had debts. He was making $10 an hour at best while watching his friends at higher stakes, wondering if he would ever break through. 3 years later, he had over $30 million in tournament earnings and was being considered for the Poker Hall of Fame at age 23. Daniel Negreanu went broke multiple times in his 20s, spending money as fast as he made it on lifestyle and bad investments and loans to the wrong people, before finally learning the systems and the discipline that would eventually make him one of the richest and most successful players in the entire history of professional poker. Blackrain79 started with $60 that he got from selling play money chips online to people who would actually pay real money for fake poker chips, and turned that tiny starting amount into a documented six-figure bankroll, grinding micro-stakes cash games, while building one of the highest verified win rates in online poker history at those stakes. Annette Obrestad built her entire initial bankroll playing free roll tournaments without ever depositing a single dollar of her own real money, and went on to win $2 million at the World Series of Poker Europe at just 19 years old. These are not lucky gamblers who happened to get hot at the right time and rode variance to the top. These are systematic operators who understood something fundamental that 90% of poker players never learn, no matter how long they play this game. Building a bankroll from nothing to life-changing wealth is not about running good at the right moments. It is not about taking aggressive shots and hoping they work out in your favor. It is about following a precise, proven blueprint that has been validated across decades by players who started with literally nothing and ended with everything they ever dreamed of. Today, I am going to give you that exact blueprint in complete detail with nothing held back. Not vague theory, not motivational concepts. The specific system that actually works based on what professionals who built real generational wealth from this game actually did to get there. Most players will never hear what I am about to share because it requires patience and discipline that most people do not have. Let me destroy a myth right now that keeps most players stuck at low stakes forever, unable to progress no matter how hard they try or how much they study. The myth is that you need money to make money in poker, that you need to start with a significant bankroll to ever build something meaningful and lasting from this game. This is completely false, and the success stories I just shared prove it beyond any reasonable doubt. Fedor Holz had active debts while grinding $40 average buy in tournaments, barely making enough to pay his rent. Blackrain79 started with $60 total and never deposited a single additional dollar of his own money ever. Chris Ferguson famously went from $0 to $10,000 playing only free roll tournaments and the absolute lowest stakes games available, starting with literally nothing but time and discipline. The truth is actually the opposite of what most players believe about bankroll building. Starting small is an advantage, not a disadvantage, if you understand why this is mathematically and psychologically true. When you start with $50 or $100, you are forced to develop the discipline that players who start with larger bankrolls never develop because they never had to. You cannot take shots you cannot afford because your bankroll simply will not allow it. You cannot play stakes that are too high for your current skill level because you do not have the money to sit in those games. You cannot make the bankroll management mistakes that destroy 90% of players before they ever have a real chance to succeed, because the math forces you to be disciplined whether you want to be or not. Starting small forces you to master the fundamentals completely. It forces you to grind properly without shortcuts. It forces you to develop patience that becomes your greatest competitive advantage as you eventually move up stakes where other players are impatient and reckless with their money because they never learned discipline the hard way. Here is the first principle of the blueprint that everything else depends on. Your starting bankroll size does not determine your ceiling in this game. Your systems determine your ceiling. A player who starts with $50 and follows the correct blueprint consistently will dramatically outperform a player who starts with $5,000 and follows no system whatsoever. The second principle is game selection, and this is where most players completely sabotage themselves without even realizing what they are doing wrong or why their results are so much worse than they should be given their skill level. Most players choose games based on what stakes they want to play, what stakes feel exciting and prestigious to them, what stakes their friends and poker buddies play at, what stakes match their ego and self-image as a player. Professionals who built real bankrolls from nothing choose games based on one criterion only, and they are ruthless about it. Where is the money? Where are the weakest players who make the most exploitable mistakes? Where can I maximize my actual hourly rate in dollars, even if it means playing lower stakes than I am theoretically capable of beating based on my skill level? BlackRain79 became famous in the poker community for mass multi-tabling. The lowest stakes games online, even after he had accumulated a bankroll large enough to comfortably play much higher stakes with proper bankroll management. Why would anyone with a six-figure bankroll waste their time playing $2 buy-in games against beginners? Because those games were the most profitable per hour of actual playing time when you factor in the ability to play 20 or 30 tables simultaneously against the weakest opponents in poker who make the most obvious and most exploitable fundamental mistakes over and over again. Jonathan Little emphasizes in his bankroll building content that you must find cash games where you can specifically target when the weakest players are playing. Friday and Saturday nights when recreational players are drinking and gambling loosely. Specific poker rooms with good promotions running that attract casual players. Times and locations where the fish are swimming and the regs are sleeping. This is not glamorous poker. This is not what the game looks like on television or in vlogs from players who are already wealthy. But this is exactly how bankrolls actually get built by players who end up rich rather than players who end up broke, telling stories about how unlucky they were and how rigged the sites are against them specifically. The third principle builds directly on game selection, and it separates serious players from amateurs who will never progress. You must track everything obsessively with complete data integrity. Not just your wins and losses in total, your hourly rate broken down by stake level, your results by day of the week, your profit by time of day, your win rate against specific opponent types that you categorize and tag in your tracking software. The data tells you exactly where your profit actually comes from, and most players are genuinely shocked when they finally start tracking seriously for the first time in their poker careers. They discover that most of their profit comes from a surprisingly small number of specific situations and specific opponent types that they should be targeting aggressively. They discover that certain games they thought were profitable are actually costing them money when you factor in the time invested and the variance experienced. They discover patterns in their own play and in opponent behavior that completely change how they allocate their limited playing time for maximum profit. The fourth principle is bankroll management, and I need to be completely direct with you about something that will determine whether you succeed or fail at this game over the long term. Everything you have heard about bankroll management from casual sources is probably wrong or outdated because it was designed for a different era of poker when games were softer and variance was more forgiving of mistakes. Here is what actually works in modern poker games based on data from players who have built real sustainable bankrolls in today's tough competitive environment. This is where I need to stop and tell you something critical that most bankroll content completely ignores. Strategy is worthless without psychology. The players who actually built bankrolls from nothing to millions did not just follow rules. They built complete mental operating systems that allowed them to execute those rules consistently under pressure, when every instinct screamed at them to deviate and take a shot or chase a loss. That is exactly what the Mind of a Grinder Collection 2 provides completely. 10 ebooks covering the full mental architecture of bankroll building. How to maintain iron discipline when variance destroys you for weeks straight. How to resist the overwhelming temptation to take shots you cannot afford. How to stay patient grinding small stakes when your ego desperately wants you to play bigger. Plus 5 premium bonuses including the bankroll tracking system and the move-up decision framework. $29.89. Launch price only. Link in pinned comment. Click it now. Then come back for the move-up system that actually works. Rawers, welcome back. The fifth principle is the move-up system, and this is exactly where most players destroy their bankrolls trying to climb stakes too quickly because they are impatient and they let their ego make decisions that should be made by mathematics and data. Here is the exact protocol that actually works based on what successful players truly do versus what they claim they do in interviews and content. You move up to the next stake level when you have accumulated 40 buy-ins for that new stake, and you have proven over at least 50,000 hands or 200 sessions that you are a consistent winner at your current stake with a verifiable edge that shows up clearly in your tracking data. Not break-even results, not slightly positive results that could be variance. A consistent documented winner with an edge you can prove mathematically. BlackRain79 recommends 40 buy-ins specifically because it provides enough of a cushion to survive nearly all normal variance swings, while not being so excessively conservative that you waste equity grinding longer than necessary at stakes you have already clearly mastered and should be moving up from. Here is the critical detail that most move-up advice completely ignores, because it requires discipline that most players do not have. You set aside a specific predetermined number of buy-ins for your shot at the higher stake level. Usually 5 to 10 buy-ins depending on your risk tolerance. If you lose that exact amount, you immediately move back down to your previous stake without any negotiation with yourself, without any exception whatsoever, without telling yourself. You will just play a few more hands to try to get it back. You move down automatically because the system told you to move down. Moving down stakes is not failure. Moving down is the system working exactly as it was designed to work. Nathan Williams has written extensively about how he personally failed multiple times at every single stake level he ever attempted before finally breaking through and becoming a consistent winner at that level. Every successful player has this exact same story, if they are being honest. The sixth principle is the hourly rate calculation that almost nobody teaches because it requires mathematical thinking that most players do not want to do or find boring compared to actually playing hands. Your goal is not to play the highest stakes possible because that feels prestigious and impressive to your poker friends. Your actual goal, if you want to build wealth, is to maximize your hourly expected value in real dollars across all relevant factors, including game quality and softness, an opponent's skill level and variance and psychological sustainability over long sessions. Here is exactly how this works with real concrete numbers so you can apply it immediately. Let us say you can beat NL25 for 5 big blinds per 100 hands playing 4 tables simultaneously, which is a solid, respectable win rate at that stake level. Your hourly rate at that volume is approximately $20 per hour of playing time. Now let us say you can beat NL10 for 12 big blinds per 100 hands, playing 8 tables simultaneously, because the games are significantly softer with more recreational players, and you can play more volume with less mental strain and decision fatigue. Your hourly rate at that volume is approximately $24 per hour of actual playing time. In this realistic scenario, you make more money per hour playing the lower stake level because the combination of higher win rate and higher comfortable volume outweighs the higher stakes at NL25, where your win rate and volume both suffer. Most players never do this calculation because they assume without thinking that higher stakes automatically equals more money. And they are often completely wrong about this assumption. The players who build the biggest bankrolls in online poker optimize ruthlessly for hourly expected value in real dollars, not for stakes, prestige, or ego satisfaction or impressing their friends in the poker community. This is exactly why some of the most financially successful grinders in online poker history spent years at micro stakes, building volume and consistency and skill, rather than rushing up to mid-stakes, where their win rate collapsed and their hourly rate actually decreased despite sitting at what looked like bigger, more impressive games. The seventh principle is reinvestment strategy, and it is what separates players who stay small forever wondering why they never progress from players who compound their way to real wealth that changes their lives permanently. When you start making consistent profit from poker, you face a critical decision point that most players get completely wrong because they want immediate reward for their hard work. Do you withdraw your winnings to enjoy them now? Or do you reinvest them back into your poker bankroll to compound growth over time? Here is the framework that actually produces long-term wealth based on what successful players have actually done, rather than what feels good in the moment. You reinvest 100% of your poker winnings until you have reached a bankroll level that allows you to play stakes where genuinely meaningful money can be made with reasonable volume. For most online players, this means continuing to reinvest completely until you can comfortably play NL 100 or higher with proper bankroll management in place. For live players, this means reinvesting until you can play 2-5 or higher comfortably with full bankroll protection. The reasoning behind this is purely mathematical and unemotional. At micro stakes, your hourly rate is simply too low for withdrawals to meaningfully impact your life or standard of living in any noticeable way. Withdrawing $50 per week from your micro stakes profit feels like a nice reward for your hard work, but it is actually sabotage of your future. because that $50 compounding over time in your bankroll is exactly what eventually moves you up to stakes where you can withdraw $500 per week without impacting your bankroll growth at all. Think of your early-stage bankroll as a business startup that requires capital investment before it can produce meaningful returns for the owner. No successful business pays out all of its profits in year one to the founders. Successful businesses reinvest intelligently until they reach sustainable scale, and then they pay out profits while continuing to grow simultaneously. The eighth principle is variance protection, and it requires understanding something that most players dramatically underestimate about the actual mathematics of poker results over time. Even the absolute best players in the entire world experience downswings that would completely destroy most amateur bankrolls if they were not properly funded to survive those inevitable swings. Professional players with verified 5 big blind per 100 win rates, which is elite-level performance, can and do experience 20 to 30 buy-in downswings that last weeks or sometimes months of consistent losing despite playing well. This is not running bad in some unusual way. This is normal mathematical variance that happens to literally everyone who plays enough hands over enough time at any stake level. Tombos21 from GTO Wizard published detailed analysis showing that your biggest villain in poker is not actually the other players sitting at the table with you trying to take your money. It is the rake and the variance structure that the house creates through their fee structure. At low stakes, where the rake percentage is highest relative to the stakes being played, the actual number of genuinely winning players after accounting for rake is shockingly small and much lower than most players assume. Surviving variance over the long term requires 3 things working simultaneously together. First, you need the bankroll depth we discussed earlier in this video. 30 buy-ins absolute minimum for cash games, and 100 buy-ins or more for tournaments where variance is even more extreme. Second, you need psychological protocols and mental frameworks that prevent tilt during downswings from compounding your losses through bad emotional play that you would never make when thinking clearly. Third, you need concrete stop-loss rules that force you to quit sessions when you are losing beyond a certain threshold, regardless of how you feel emotionally in that moment. A common protocol used by successful grinders is a 3 buy-in stop-loss. If you lose 3 buy-ins in a single session, you quit playing immediately, regardless of current game conditions, regardless of how well you believe you are playing, regardless of whether you feel certain you are due to win the next big hand. And the 9th principle is the compound effect timeline. And I need to give you completely realistic expectations about how long this bankroll building process actually takes, because most poker content lies to you about speed and timeline in order to generate views and sell unrealistic dreams. Building a bankroll from $50 to stakes where genuinely meaningful, life-changing money can be made takes 1 to 3 years for most players executing the system correctly with consistent effort and continuous improvement. This is not failure. This is not going slow. This is the actual realistic timeline that the successful players you admire experienced before they reached the stakes that eventually created their wealth and changed their lives. Fedor Holz grinded small stakes tournaments for years, making barely enough to survive before finally breaking through to the high roller circuit where real money was on the table. BlackRain79 spent years at micro-stakes cash games before building to levels where meaningful income was possible from his poker playing. Daniel Negreanu went broke multiple times over many years of struggle before finally developing the discipline and the systems that made him one of the wealthiest players in poker history. The players who try to compress this timeline artificially take shots they cannot afford at stakes they are not ready for, and they move up levels before they have proven they can beat their current stake consistently, and they eventually go broke while blaming bad luck or variance or rigged random number generators or whatever excuse feels good in the moment. The players who accept the realistic timeline and execute the system consistently every day eventually reach stakes that genuinely change their financial lives permanently. Here is what the compound effect actually looks like with realistic achievable numbers for a dedicated player. Starting with $100 at NL2, the lowest stakes available, building to $500 over 3 to 6 months of consistent play and improvement, moving to NL5 and building to $1,000 over another 3 to 6 months of grinding and studying. Here is the final 10th principle that ties everything together and creates the complete blueprint that actually produces results over time. Sustainable poker success that builds real wealth requires treating this as a serious business, not a recreational hobby, and building systems that operate independently of your emotional state on any given day or session. The players who built real bankrolls from nothing to millions did not rely on motivation or willpower, or feeling like playing on days when they were tired or frustrated. They built concrete systems that produced results regardless of how they felt in the moment. Fixed session schedules that they honored whether they wanted to play or not, because the schedule was the boss, not their feelings. Bankroll rules that automatically determined what stakes to play without requiring willpower decisions in the moment when emotions might cloud judgment. Stop-loss protocols that ended sessions automatically before tilt could cause damage that would take weeks to recover from. Study schedules that produced continuous improvement in their skills even during periods when their results were negative and they felt like giving up. Move up and move down rules that executed automatically based on bankroll thresholds, not based on how confident they felt on any particular day. These systems eliminate decision fatigue completely. They eliminate the psychological pressure of making important bankroll decisions when you are emotional or tired or tilted. They eliminate the variability in execution that destroys most players over time, because they rely on willpower, which is a depleting resource, rather than systems which operate consistently forever. You build the system once with careful thought, then you execute the system forever without negotiation. The system does the thinking, so you can focus on playing your best poker instead of constantly negotiating with yourself about whether to move up or take a shot, or withdraw money you should be reinvesting. The Mind of a Grinder Collection 2 contains exactly these systems, plus the psychological frameworks that make consistent execution possible even when you do not feel like following the rules. 10 ebooks, 5 premium bonuses. The complete operating system for building a bankroll that changes your life. $29.89. Launch price for a few days, only then it increases permanently. Fedor Holz built his bankroll with support systems and study groups and mentors holding him accountable to his process. Daniel Negreanu learned discipline only after going broke multiple times and finally building the mental frameworks that made execution automatic and inevitable. You do not have to learn these lessons through painful, expensive failure. You do not have to go broke to understand what discipline actually means. Link is in the pinned comment below. Click it now. Change your trajectory today. If this video delivered value you have never received in any poker content, hit that subscribe button immediately and join this community of players who are building real wealth from this game using proven systems that actually work. Share this with one friend who needs to hear it, because they are making mistakes right now that will keep them stuck forever if nobody shows them the path. The blueprint is clear. The path is proven. The only question remaining is whether you will execute it or whether you will keep doing what you have been doing and keep getting what you have been getting. See you in the next one.